Hello and welcome. You're watching Gravitas. My name is Priyanka Sharma. Let's take a look at what's coming up on the show tonight. Do not consider the nuclear threat a bluff. This was a warning from Russia's President Vladimir Putin to the West. Now a Russian convoy has been spotted. It was transporting equipment for Moscow's nuclear weapons program. It was on the move. Where was it headed? We'll find out in a bit, but this development has sparked fears. What is on Vladimir Putin's mind? Is this another warning, or is it a dangerous escalation in this war? This is our focus on Gravitas tonight. Stay with us.
Хочу напомнить, что наша страна также располагает различными средствами поражения, а по отдельным компонентам и более современными, чем у стран НАТО. И при угрозе территориальной целостности нашей страны для защиты России и нашего народа мы, безусловно, используем все имеющиеся в нашем распоряжении средства. Это не блеф.
Russia sending fresh signals to the West. After annexing 4 Ukrainian territories, Moscow seems to be mounting another escalation, a nuclear escalation. Some disturbing reports have emerged. A convoy is on the move. It is believed to be carrying equipment from Russia's nuclear program. Where is it headed? Apparently to the front lines in Ukraine. Last week, Vladimir Putin had issued a warning to the West. He had said his nuclear threats should not be considered a bluff. So is Putin now acting on these very threats? What does this mean for the war in Ukraine? Russia's latest nuclear dare is our cover story tonight. I'd like to begin with some pictures. A video has emerged from central Russia. Take a look. And now let's take a closer look at those pictures. What do you see? There are some military assets. They are mounted on a train and they are on the move. What exactly is on this train? Some reports have emerged. There is a reason to be worried. Apparently, this train is linked to the Russian Ministry of Defense. More specifically, the 12th Main Directorate. What does it do? According to a report, the 12th Main Directorate is a secret nuclear division. It is responsible for nuclear munitions, for one, their storage, maintenance, transport, and issuance to military units. So, were nuclear weapons being moved on that train? That's the question. We cannot say for sure at this point. Some experts are skeptical. They say these could just be armored vehicles and nothing more. But we need to focus on this fact that no expert is denying this fact. Russia's greatest leverage in this war is its nuclear arsenal. We've spoken about this before, and Moscow plans to use it to its advantage. The NATO has issued a warning to its members. It claims Vladimir Putin has ordered a nuclear test. It could be conducted on Ukraine's borders. This assessment was part of a NATO intelligence report. It had some very specific details. Allegedly, Russia is now considering testing the Poseidon. It has been nicknamed the weapon of the apocalypse. Why? Well, much of its capabilities still remain a secret. Russia hasn't shared much about the Poseidon, but what we do know is this. The missile is about 20 meters long. It is a torpedo, which means it is fired from a submarine. The missile is said to have a range of at least 10,000 kilometers. So it is essentially a long-range weapon. A Russian submarine is on the move. The K-529 Belgorod. It is capable of firing nuclear missiles. NATO hasn't said anything yet about these reports publicly, but last week it had warned the Russian president. Listen in now.
President Putin's nuclear rhetoric is dangerous. It is reckless. Russia must understand that the nuclear war can never be won and must never be fought, and it will have severe consequences for Russia.
Let's talk about the United States. What's its reaction? Well, the US is not dismissing these threats either. They are taking them rather seriously. The White House has issued its own assessment. It said the world would not take the threats from Putin lightly. The risk has been there from the start. What's driving these fears, though? Is there any factual basis to these assessments? Or is it all just posturing at the end of the day? There are some reasons why these threats are being taken seriously at the moment, and one of them is Russia's nuclear doctrine. It describes the conditions under which the Russian state can undertake a nuclear strike. At this point, I want to draw your attention to a very specific clause. A nuclear strike is allowed in the event of, and I'm quoting, aggression against the Russian Federation with conventional weapons when the very existence of the state is threatened. The last bit is important. Let me emphasize, a nuclear response is okay if the very existence of the Russian state is under threat. And now let's juxtapose this with some recent comments from the Russian president. What are the reasons that Putin has given to wage this war in Ukraine? He has pitched this as a fight between Russia and the West, where the very existence of the Russian state is under threat.
They do not wish us freedom. They want to see us as a colony. They don't want equal cooperation with us, but robbery. They don't want to see us as a free society, but a crowd of soulless slaves.
The West wants Russia to be a colony. They want to see Russians as a crowd of soulless slaves. So what message is Putin trying to send here? He is implying that the very existence of the Russian state was under threat, and hence the need to wage war. My question is, will the same logic be applied to deploy nukes? The Kremlin today was asked about the reports of a nuclear test. Moscow chose to dismiss these reports and slam the West instead.
You know, Western media, Western politicians, heads of state are now practicing a lot of spreading of nuclear rhetoric. We do not want to take part in it.
Not an explicit denial per se, it wasn't an admission either. Let me remind you, we are talking about nuclear weapons here. Even flirting with the idea of using them is dangerous, to say the least. So clearly, things are escalating in Ukraine. There's no denying that. There is talk of nuclear weapons and mobilization. Makes you wonder, what happened to good old diplomacy? Is there anyone even interested in peace anymore, or the idea of peace? Well, I can say one person says he is definitely interested in peace, Elon Musk. On paper, he is a business magnate and investor. He is the CEO of Tesla Motors. But in practice, he tries to do a lot more. You will hear Elon Musk talking about gender politics, about American elections, there's more, even about the end of the world. But this time, Musk is talking geopolitics. He posted this peace plan I repeat, for the war in Ukraine. First things first, it was unsolicited. Nobody asked him to present this plan. But then again, that's Elon Musk for you, isn't it? His peace proposal has 4 crucial steps. Step 1, redo the much talked about referendums in annexed Ukrainian regions under UN supervision. So if the people reject Russia, their soldiers must leave. That's what Elon Musk suggests. Step 2. Crimea is formally recognized as part of Russia. Step 3. Restore water supply to the Crimean Peninsula. And step 4. Ukraine remains neutral, meaning it will not try to join NATO. A controversial peace plan, so to speak. By the way, this wasn't just a proposal, it was a Twitter poll. As always, Elon Musk wanted his millions of followers to approve or reject his plan. So what's the verdict? Last we checked, 40% of the people had said yes. They supported his peace plan. However, 60% of the people rejected it. And now Elon Musk, as we know, isn't the kind of guy who takes failures well. So guess what he did? Another poll naturally. This time he asked just one question. Should the will of the people in Donbass and Crimea decide whether they join Russia or Ukraine? 58% said yes and 42% said no. Interestingly, even Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky weighed in. He reacted to this. The president had a poll of his own. Which Elon Musk do you like? The one who supports Ukraine or the one who supports Russia, he asked. 79% people said the former, the Elon Musk who supports Ukraine. In the past, Musk has given statements against the war. His Starlink services have boosted internet connectivity in Ukraine. But this so-called peace plan has ruffled some feathers. Why is that? Because broadly speaking, this is what Russia wants. Crimea, neutrality, and Donbass. And under Elon Musk's proposed plan, Russia gets most of them, most of its demands. Which now brings us to the plan itself. What exactly is the thought process behind it? Again, let's go back to his Twitter barrage. Let me quote from his clarification now. This is highly likely to be the outcome in the end, just a question of how many die before then. That's what Elon Musk says. He goes on. Russia has 3 times the population of Ukraine, so victory for Ukraine is unlikely in total war. He adds, if you care about the people of Ukraine, seek peace. Now you can imagine how Ukrainians responded to this statement. Their army is making considerable progress on the ground. They are pushing Russian forces to the brink. So needless to say, Ukrainians are not too happy. They feel that Elon Musk is pushing Russian propaganda. We will get to his vested interests in just a minute, but first, let's dissect his so-called peace plan. First things first, how useful is it? I would say it is equal parts practical and equal parts impractical. I say practical because he's right about one thing. The war can only end in 2 ways. With an outright Russian victory or with concessions from Ukraine. No surprises there. The idea that Kiev can defeat a nuclear power is wishful thinking. Experts and analysts have said the same. So on that point, Musk is right. Why sacrifice thousands of soldiers just to delay the same outcome? And now, let me highlight the impractical bit. Let me pull up Elon Musk's tweet again for all of you to see. Take a look at point number 1. Russia leaves if that is the will of the people. Musk wants Russian soldiers to leave the annexed regions if the people vote for it. I wonder why none of us thought of that. Just make the Russians leave. Easy, easy. The war ends right there, right? If Vladimir Putin was concerned about the UN Charter or laws, he wouldn't have invaded in the first place. Russia would never agree to a UN-supervised referendum. Even if they did, they would never, quote-unquote, leave if the results are against them. So in that sense, Elon Musk's peace plan is a non-starter. It requires all parties to agree and work under the United Nations. And let's be honest, if that was so simple, there would not have been a war in the first place. But then again, why are we surprised? Political scientists have never launched a rocket into space. So why would Elon Musk draw up a good peace plan? The fact is, this is a classic PR strategy. A nice and simple way to stay in the news. Just think about it. Every news agency in the world has covered this story today. And right now, we're also talking about it on primetime news. So clearly, the strategy has worked. Now, as for the details of his proposal, let's make one thing clear. This is a plan that Ukraine will never agree to. Russia may milk it for propaganda alone, but they will never just leave Donbass and Crimea, as Musk says. Our next story is from North Korea. This morning, it fired a ballistic missile over Japan, the biggest provocation in recent times. It stopped trains, halted commute, and left sirens blaring. Fortunately, no damage was reported from this launch. But Japan is not taking this matter lightly. It says it is examining all options, including, quote-unquote, counter-attack capabilities. What does that mean? Our next report tells you.
Halted trains, stranded commuters, blaring sirens, and loudspeakers issuing warnings. This was the state of Japan, a state of fear and uncertainty. Courtesy a missile test by North Korea. At around 7:29 a.m. local time, Pyongyang launched a ballistic missile, which flew over Japan and crashed into the Pacific. This was North Korea's first missile test over Japan since 2017. Naturally, it sent alarm bells ringing in the country. The government was quick to ask people to take cover.
North Korea launched a missile that has flown over our country, and the nationwide incident alert system J-Alert was activated.
Train services were temporarily halted.
I was really surprised. It happened early in the morning, so it really surprised me.
Many missiles have been launched before. I understood the situation, but I had a hard time realizing what was happening until now.
Fortunately, no damage was reported. Neither were there reports of falling debris. But this launch was a huge provocation nonetheless. There was no pre-warning, no consultation, and no alert. In most cases, an act like this can be mistaken for an attack. Japan plans to treat it as such. The country's prime minister has called it an act of violence.
This is an act of violence following recent repeated launches of ballistic missiles. We strongly condemn this.
The country's defense minister says Japan is examining all options available, including the ability to launch a counterattack.
In light of the situation, we will continue to examine all options, including so-called counterattack capabilities, and we will not rule out anything as we continue to work to fundamentally strengthen our defense abilities.
Even South Korea has joined Japan in condemning Pyongyang's recklessness. The country's president has promised to reply with a resolute response.
North Korea's such reckless nuclear provocation will face resolute response from our military as well as our allies in the international community.
This missile launch was no small matter. Besides violating Japan's airspace, it covered the longest distance traveled by a North Korean missile, somewhere close to 1,000 kilometers. What's worse, this was the fifth missile launch by Pyongyang in 10 days. The last one being on Saturday, when 2 rockets crashed in the waters of Japan's exclusive economic zone. This unnerving spate of testing has sent alarm bells ringing globally. It signals the return of North Korea's brinkmanship. The question is why? What does North Korea plan to achieve through these tests? Perhaps staying relevant at a time when the world is too focused on the war in Europe. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Our next story is about General Qamar Javed Bajwa, the Chief of Staff of the Pakistan Army, and perhaps the most powerful man in the country. He is due to retire in November after 6 long years in power. But ahead of that, he's trotting the globe, receiving one state honor after another. The latest one comes from the United States. The Pentagon, to be precise. It has decided to accord the honor cordon to General Bajwa. What's that? It's a military honor, which is usually reserved for the US President, the Vice President, statutory appointees, US Army generals, or foreign dignitaries occupying positions similar to such posts. This essentially signifies a gesture of goodwill. For instance, India's Defence Minister Rajnath Singh got one when he visited the Pentagon back in April for bilateral talks with his counterpart. And now General Bajwa is expected to get the same honor. On the face of it, it seems to be a ceremonial gesture alone. But some analysts don't see it quite like that. They're a bit suspicious about America's intentions. Why? Because first of all, rarely do Pakistani officials receive such an honor. That to army officials, forget civilian leaders. That's one reason. The second reason has to do with the timing of all this. You see, this honor comes barely weeks after this development, America's decision to sell F-16 equipment to Pakistan. Last month, it approved a $450 million F-16 fleet sustainment package for Pakistan. A package that America claimed Pakistan needed to counter emerging terror threats. This move was followed by another interesting development, a statement by the US State Department. Last week it said that Pakistan was as important a partner for America as India. Listen to this.
We look to both as partners because we do have in many cases shared values. We do have in many cases shared interests. And the relationship we have with India stands on its own. The relationship we have with Pakistan stands on its own.
So let's get this straight. First, America approves the F-16 equipment sale to Pakistan. Then it calls Pakistan a partner with shared interests. And now it decides to accord an honor cordon to Pak's army chief. How should one perceive all these developments? We understand that General Bajwa is America's darling. He's the face of Pakistan in Washington, D.C. and has worked closely with America in the war on terror. So him being honored by the Pentagon is not surprising. But is he really in America for a week of goodbyes? Is this really a farewell tour, or is there more to it? From the looks of it, there seems to be a realignment of sorts in America's South Asia policy. It appears to be balancing out its equation with India and Pakistan. It no longer wants to tilt towards one side at the risk of the other. And this appears to be the reason behind America's gestures towards Pakistan. Another reason could be to pull Pakistan out of China's ambit in particular. Just look at some recent developments and you'll be able to join the dots. Let's begin with the 29th of September. The US Embassy in Islamabad put out this tweet in Urdu. It translates to, and I quote, "A good friend makes even bad times good." A reference to the financial aid that America is giving Pakistan to recover from the recent floods. And 24 hours later, the Chinese embassy in Pakistan put out this tweet. It talked about China's relief assistance to Pakistan. The caption read, "A friend in need is a friend indeed." So what does all this tell you? Two things. One, the US wants to shore up Pakistan as a partner, re-establish transactional ties with the country, and reward Islamabad for taking sides against Russia. The second big takeaway is Pakistan's ability to swing the ball both ways. It is welcoming America's gestures with open arms. At the same time, it's still benefiting from Chinese aid. But this balancing act could very well backfire as this game of push and pull between the US and China intensifies. We'll, of course, keep tracking the latest. Speaking of China, let's move on. Xi Jinping has his hand on all levers of power in China. It's no secret. He's the president of the country, the general secretary of the Communist Party, and the chairman of the Central Military Commission. That's the top military body of China. And very soon he is expected to secure a record third term. The significance of this cannot be underestimated. A third term puts Xi Jinping on par with Mao Zedong, the father of modern-day China. Will Xi Jinping mark the occasion by giving himself a title bump, something that truly secures his place in history books? What title would the Communist Party give to a leader who already has control over everything? How does chairman sound? Speculation is growing. There is a good chance that Xi Jinping will create a new identity for himself. Chairman Xi Jinping. It is a title that hasn't been used since the Mao years. But Xi Jinping could resurrect it. But why? What's the thinking behind the move? To understand the significance, we need to turn back the clock. When Mao Zedong was in power, he served as the chairman of the Communist Party, and that's where Chairman Mao comes from. As chairman, Mao enjoyed sweeping powers. He controlled not only the government, but the armed forces too. But in Mao's case, the title chairman became a part of his identity. Such was his cult of personality. While he was in office, Mao completely eliminated the office of the president. It effectively gave Chairman Mao complete control. He held this title till his death in 1976. A few more leaders got a chance to become chairman after Mao, but they were never really able to match Mao's stature. When Deng Xiaoping took charge, he tried to restore the balance of power. He restored the offices of the president, set a 2-term limit for the post, and abolished the title of chairman. Unlike Mao, Deng was firmly against any form of consolidation of power. Now, as we all know by now, Xi Jinping has reversed many of those Mao-era reforms. He got rid of the term limits on the presidency in 2018. This now allows Xi to rule over China for life. Xi Jinping has amassed power on a similar scale as Mao. He is the head of the government, the party and the military. The title of chairman would reaffirm his position within the Chinese setup, give his undeniable grip on power more legitimacy, if that's even possible. And he seems to have the support to push for this. Consider now what is happening at the Central Political and Legal Affairs Commission. This happens to be a key wing of China's Communist Party. It oversees law enforcement within China. It includes a police force. And we all know how paranoid the Communist Party is about internal security. Here are some facts. China spends more on domestic security than the PLA. Now a key leader in law enforcement is drumming up support for Xi Jinping. His name is Chen Yixin. He is the Secretary General of the Central Political and Legal Affairs Commission. Listen to this. I quote, "Our party and our country are so lucky to have General Secretary Xi Jinping as the core of the party's leader and the commander of the military. We must wholeheartedly rally around the core and love the core." Now that's what Shen Shihin wrote recently. He's sending a message to all law enforcement officers. Support Xi Jinping no matter what. Already the Chinese mouthpieces have begun calling Xi Jinping the people's leader. That's another attempt to put Xi Jinping on par with Mao. Don't forget, Mao Zedong was called the great leader, and Xi Jinping is being called the people's leader. So, will he add the title of chairman to his kitty? We'll only find out later this month when the Communist Party meets for its 20th Congress in Beijing. Of course, we'll keep an eye on all the developments for you. Now, Xi Jinping may be preparing for his coronation, but like all leaders, all world leaders, he faces a challenging period ahead. Why do I say that? Because a recession is around the corner. A few months back, we were discussing the possibility of a recession, and now the topic has changed. It's not a question of if there will be a recession, it's a question of how deep will it be. Let me now show you some of the warning signs. Number 1, top corporate leaders are already bracing for the worst. Consulting firm KPMG polled 400 business leaders in the United States. 91% of them are predicting a recession. Only 34% expect it to be mild and short. The rest, almost 66%, are predicting a longish one, a long recession at that. Now, business leaders are well placed to make these forecasts. They track the job market. They know all about debt and investments, and right now they are predicting a painful recession. The next big question, how are they preparing for it? Most companies brace for recessions and cost cuts, and more often than not, that means firing people. Mid-level companies are planning exactly this. A recent survey found that 25% of all such firms are firing workers. In fact, some have already begun the layoffs. Others are planning it in the next 12-month cycle. Now, this is the biggest indicator of a looming recession, sort of like flashing red lights. Remember, during the recession of 2008, America's unemployment rate doubled. It rose from 5% to 10%. The same thing happened during the 2020 lockdowns. The US unemployment rate topped 14.7%. The question is, will 2023 be the same? Let me now tell you what Goldman Sachs is predicting. They believe that US unemployment will increase from 3.6% to 4%. So not really a massive increase, but still substantial. Let's tell you what's happening in India. It is also going through a similar churn. Major IT companies are reportedly revoking offer letters. This includes the likes of Tech Mahindra, Wipro and Infosys. All these companies recruited freshers from colleges. They put them through interviews and tests, even gave them offer letters, but now, almost 4 months later, the offer has been withdrawn. The reason? Officially, they say it's because of eligibility criteria and company guidelines, but experts say it's because of the slowdown. Many of these recruits are now speaking out on social media. Coming back now to the warning signs. Even UN agencies have started sounding them. I'm talking about UNCTAD, the UN Conference on Trade and Development. On Monday, the body released a new report on the global economy. It is titled Development Prospects in a Fractured World. The whole report is pretty long, but let me show you the big takeaways, the highlights. Number one, the world is headed towards a recession and prolonged stagnation. Number two, the looming crisis could be worse than the 2008 recession. Number three, this crisis is the result of bad policy and misplaced political will. Number four, developing countries will face the brunt of it, especially those in Latin America and Africa. The report also mentions some numbers. The global economic growth is expected to fall to 2.5% in 2022 and 2.2% in 2023. The slowdown could cost us 20% of global income. That's around $17 trillion. Next up is the debt crisis. 60% of all low-income countries are almost in debt distress, plus 30% of emerging market countries. These governments do not have the money to service their debt, and if things get worse, you could be looking at more Sri Lankas. Adding to their misery is, of course, the dollar. Currencies in 90 developing countries have weakened against the dollar, meaning their imports are more expensive. They are spending more dollars to buy food, fuel, and fertilizers, which means they are burning through their reserves. Not an ideal situation at all. Since the UN is calling this crisis policy-induced, is there any way out of it? Can we possibly avoid this recession? The UNCTAD chief believes it is still possible. Let me now quote what she said. Focusing solely on a monetary policy approach without addressing supply-side issues in trade, energy and food markets may indeed exacerbate the problem. So what is the UNCTAD asking for? More pragmatic policies. For example, windfall taxes. Multinational companies have used this crisis to boost their own profits. The best example is big oil. The UN wants governments to tax these extra profits. That would bring in some much-needed relief money. Secondly, curb speculation. Food and fuel prices have been volatile in the last year, and this has led to a speculation frenzy in futures contracts and commodity swaps. Let me explain. Usually that's not the case. People enter the agriculture market to buy the commodity, to take delivery of it. But now, financial players have entered it. They are looking to earn profits through speculation. They are not interested in actually taking delivery of the commodity. And the result is this. Demand and supply forces are not strong anymore. The market is becoming more and more volatile. The UN wants governments to tame just that. And finally, the last point, job creation. I know this may sound strange. Usually, you need to have job cuts to drive down inflation. But in this case, the UN is asking for intelligent spending, like on green energy or climate-resilient infrastructure. This will not only contribute to the clean economy aspect of it, but it will also create much-needed jobs. The bottom line is this. There is still time, maybe not to avoid a recession completely, but at least to limit its impact, soften the blow. But for that, we need pragmatic and political choices, like finding a solution to the war in Ukraine, or reducing trade frictions among major economies like the US and China. I know these may not be politically popular moves, but with the window closing fast, our options are limited. Let's now shift our focus to Switzerland, a country famous for its quality of life, its scenic views. It's a tourist hotspot. But now, according to a new United Nations report, Switzerland also has systemic racism issues. Yes. A report by a UN working group says that racial discrimination is rife in the country, especially towards people of African descent. So what is the basis for this report? What kind of evidence does it provide? And how have Swiss authorities responded? Our next report gets you all the details.
Located in the mountains of Central Europe is the landlocked country of Switzerland, a nation of 8.7 million people. Famous for its breathtaking mountains, high human development index, and of course its banks. But right now, this country is in the news for something unusual. A rare accusation of racial discrimination. Yes, Switzerland has been accused of being structurally racist. By whom? A UN-appointed working group. In January this year, it released this report, blaming Switzerland of systemic racism, especially towards people of African descent. The report mentioned shocking reports of police brutality, incidents of impunity for police misconduct, and a policy of racial profiling by authorities. What was this report based on? A 10-day fact-finding mission by United Nations officials. In January this year, they traveled across Switzerland and met with people of African descent, along with politicians, police representatives, and civil society groups. At the end of their investigation, they concluded that Switzerland had a hidden problem of prejudice. The report mentioned two important cases. The first one was of a certain Zoe Roger Wilhelm, who was shot dead by cops on the suspicion of carrying a knife. The UN report says he was a victim of ethnic profiling. The second case is of Brian Kay, a 26-year-old Swiss citizen, who has been in prison since 2018. Despite being diagnosed with a hyperactivity disorder, the UN report calls it a stark example of systemic racism. Switzerland has denied both accusations. On Monday, the Swiss ambassador to the UN Human Rights Council criticized the report. He said, and we quote, "The report is a compilation of assumptions and misunderstandings, which are not representative of the real situation in Switzerland. Numerous general conclusions seems to be based on only one or several individual cases." So, what happens next? Well, Switzerland plans to challenge the report's findings and publish its own report on the situation on ground. WION World is One.
Every day, we learn something new about global warming. And as we end the show tonight, there's something new to be learned today as well. The Science magazine in the United States has revealed something alarming. Melting ice could be making our oceans acidic. This could have a disastrous impact on marine organisms and also species like polar bears, which consume fish in their diet. So why exactly is seawater turning acidic, and what can we do to prevent the process? The next report tells you more.
Melting ice is increasing our sea levels. We have all heard this axiom of climate change. But turns out our seas aren't just rising, they are also becoming acidic. The reason, once again, it's climate change. Researchers have found a link between melting ice and the sea's acidity. Before we understand the science, some basic facts. Seawater is normally alkaline. It has a pH value of 8.1. The pH value is a scale used to denote whether a substance is acidic or basic. Anything under 7 is acidic. Anything over 7 is basic or alkaline. Since seawater is 8.1, it is normally considered alkaline. But maybe not for long. Researchers have been studying Arctic ice melting for almost 3 decades now. Their data indicates a strange trend. The seawater is getting acidic all over the world, but in the Arctic it is almost 3 to 4 times faster. The question is, why? Researchers concluded that there is only one plausible explanation: the melting ice. Again, time to put our science cap on. Usually the water under sea ice is not exposed to the atmosphere, hence it does not absorb carbon dioxide, but that's not the case anymore. With sea ice melting, the deep water is also absorbing carbon dioxide. The result? Seawater's pH levels are plunging. It is becoming acidic in nature. This could be catastrophic for marine organisms like crabs. Have you ever touched their crusty outer shell? That's built from calcium carbonate. If the seawater becomes acidic, that's a whole different story. No calcium carbonate, no crusty shells. Same with fish. Acidic waters can close up their gills, thereby curbing their ability to take in oxygen. This in turn could trigger a chain reaction. For humans, for polar bears, for dozens of species using fish in their diet. Is there any way to reverse this acidic change? Well, the answer has always been clear. Contain and limit global warming. Protect the sea ice so that our oceans will absorb less carbon dioxide. If not, it could change the physics and chemistry of our seas. Perhaps not today or tomorrow, but definitely in the long run. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
And now let's take a look at what else made news around the world. Time for Gravitas Global Headlines.
President Joe Biden says the United States will impose further costs on Iran for its lethal crackdown on protests sparked by the death of Mahsa Amini, drawing accusations of hypocrisy from Iran. Russia's defense minister Sergei Shoigu says more than 200,000 people have been conscripted into the Russian army since President Putin announced a mobilization drive on September 21st. Facing a fresh battle with the MPs, UK Prime Minister Liz Truss refuses to rule out real-term benefit cuts to fund her tax-cutting growth plan. Around 140 million people in Bangladesh were without power on Tuesday afternoon after a grid failure caused widespread blackouts. The EU Parliament passes a new law requiring USB-C to be the single charger standard for all new smartphones, tablets and cameras from late 2024. In a major push towards gender equality, the Indian Air Force will begin inducting women as a part of the force by 2023, under its Agniveer scheme. Elaine Aspect, John F. Clauser, and Anton Seilinger have won the Nobel Prize in Physics for their landmark achievements in quantum mechanics. That is the study of the behavior of particles and atoms. Saudi Arabia to host the 2029 Asian Winter Games at an under-construction $500 billion futuristic desert megacity that planners say will feature a year-round winter sports complex. A year-long independent investigation has found systemic abuse and misconduct within women's professional soccer in the United States. It also reveals that the National Women's Soccer League under the U.S. Soccer Federation failed to provide a safe environment for players. Reigning US Open champion Carlos Alcaraz has lost the first match he played after becoming world number 1 following his US Open triumph. The Spanish teenager went down against Belgium's David Goffin in the first round of the Astana Open.
And that's a wrap on Gravitas. Thanks for watching the show with me, Priyanka Sharma. Coming up next is Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.
We've done over the past few months with the pod, and just walking around and dancing that new platform.
That's the world the robot sees. So it's very clearly identifying us.